In this prologue, we come back to the combat situation in Mission 2, where the engine of the Fokker of Joseph Saxonberg was hit 2 times during an encounter with a Nieuport scout plane, flown by a French veteran pilot. In the first round of combat, Joseph decided to perform a tight turn, which would gain him 2 positions due to the rotary engine of his Fokker. The enemy pilot fired his forward guns, hitting the engine of the Fokker 2 times. The engine of the Fokker was damaged by the first hit and made inoperative by the second. A plane with a damaged rotary engine can no longer benefit from improving 2 positions. In a tight turn, a damaged rotary engine will only improve 1 position. However, as both the firing of the Nieuport and the tight turn of the Fokker took place at the same time, the Fokker could still improve 2 positions in the first combat round, despite the rotary engine being damaged during the first round of combat. If the rotary engine would only have been damaged, the Fokker could continue combat, but would no longer be able to gain 2 positions in subsequent combat rounds. He would only be able to gain 1 position. With a dead engine, however, the pilot has to break off the engagement once the combat round is over. At the end of each round of combat, the player must roll for initiative. This roll is modified by the base initiative, which is determined by the agility and speed of the aircraft. The base initiative of the Fokker had, however, decreased from 12 to 8 due to the dead engine. While a damaged engine only costs 2 speed, an engine that is out costs 4 speed. On the roll for final initiative, the Nieuport rolled a 5 while the Fokker rolled a 1. This resulted in a final initiative of 17 for the Nieuport and a 9 for the Fokker. As the difference was more than 5 in favor of the Nieuport gained 2 positions. This brought the Nieuport back into the head-on position, from which he could fire on the Fokker. In this prologue, we will shortly discuss what would have happened if the shoe had been on the other foot. Suppose the Nieuport rolled the 1 and the Fokker rolled the 5. In that case, the final initiative of both aircraft would have been equal and no position change would have taken place at the end of the round. The Fokker, being on the tail of the Nieuport, would have automatically disengaged and perform an emergency landing without being shot at by the Nieuport. It was as if the pilot of the Nieuport lost sight of the Fokker, while the latter was diving and performing an emergency landing due to his death engine. Suppose both Nieuport and Fokker rolled the same number, for instance a 3. The difference would then have been 4 in the favor of the French pilot, and the Nieuport would have gained 1 position. This would have resulted in the Fokker still being in an advantaged position at the end of the round. The Fokker then had to roll to try to disengage. If the Fokker rolled 4 or less, he would have disengaged and perform an emergency landing without being shot at by the Nieuport. If the Fokker would have rolled a 5 or a 6, he would have failed to disengage and consequently lose 1 position. The Fokker would then be in the same head-on position as he was in Mission 2 due to a bad initiative roll. From this position, the Nieuport can fire at the Fokker while he is performing a dive. The Nieuport can then also fire a second time, when the Fokker is performing an emergency landing. Mission 2 had an interesting situation which deserved some more explanation. This was the purpose of this prologue. Joseph Saxonberg has become a well-respected pilot. In his first month of active duty, he has already shot down a French Nieuport 21 and an enemy observation balloon. He will now commence his 4th mission, the last contact patrol of the month of September. Jasta 5 is conducting operations in support of the 2nd German Army in the Verdun region. On his way to the briefing room, Joseph meets Commander Burr, who wishes Joseph good hunting on his next mission. In the briefing room, Joseph hears the mission assignment of today. This time it's an offensive patrol over enemy territory. An offensive patrol marker is placed on the aircraft display mat, and also one on the map of the Western Front. Joseph takes off in his Fokker D3 from the aerodrome of Charleroi. We roll for an enemy encounter. While Joseph is climbing, he spots an enemy two-seater. We roll to determine what kind of two-seater Joseph has ran into. And it turns out to be an old acquaintance, a French Nieuport 12. We now roll for starting orientation. And Joseph starts head-on. At this point, Joseph could try to avoid combat. Two-seaters are, however, the eyes of the French army, and he decides to fully engage the Nieuport 12. We roll for the quality of the enemy pilot. Joseph is dealing with a trained French pilot. We select the Nieuport 12. It has a speed of 9, an agility of 2, rear guns, and a rotary engine. When selecting the Nieuport 12, its marker is automatically placed on our aircraft display mat. In a head-to-head encounter, we have to roll to see if the two-seater opens fire or goes defensive. A Nieuport 12, however, has no forward guns. Thus no roll is required, because the Nieuport will go defensive anyway. Joseph will open fire and pulls the trigger. We draw a combat card for Joseph. And Joseph scores 5 potential hits. The rotary-equipped Nieuport 12 will always use a tight turn when disadvantaged or tailed. In a head-on situation, however, he will draw a combat card. The two-seater uses the defensive section of the combat card. In this case, a split S is performed, avoiding one hit and ending the encounter. Joseph opens fire. 1 ammo is spent. Because of the split S, the enemy two-seater avoids 1 hit. Joseph will therefore score 4 potential hits. We roll for the first hit. And Joseph strikes canvas, inflicting no damage. We roll for the second hit. Now Joseph hits the starboard strut of the enemy two-seater. We roll for the third hit. And again Joseph hits canvas. We now roll for the fourth and final hit. And this time Joseph hits the engine of the two-seater. The damage is marked on the aircraft display mat of the French two-seater. We now have to roll to determine if the engine catches fire because of the hit. And the engine of the two-seater does not catch fire. Because of the split S maneuver of the Nieuport 12, the engagement ends. Because the engine of the two-seater is damaged, it is possible the aircraft will not make it back to base. To find out if the two-seater made it back to base, we roll with a 10-sided die and we add 1 to the die roll due to the engine being damaged. If we roll 10 or more, then the damaged Nieuport 12 will crash before reaching home. We roll an 8. Adding 1 for the damaged engine, we get a 9, and the two-seater makes it back home. This time, no victory for Joseph. Joseph continues his journey. He flies over friendly territory towards the front line. And we roll again for an encounter. There are no enemy planes over friendly lines. Joseph moves to no man's land. We roll for an enemy encounter. We roll for 3+ fighters. Running into a group of 3+ fighters is only relevant when Joseph would be solitary hunting. As part of a squadron, encountering 3+ fighters is the same as having a regular encounter with a fighter. However, the first time a 12 is rolled during a sortie, a random event occurs. A random event can range from very good to very bad for Joseph. We roll to see which event Joseph encounters. Hopefully, he will not run into an historical ace. As if the devil is involved, Joseph does encounter a historical ace. This is not good news for Joseph, as this is too soon in his career. We have to randomly draw an ace from a nationality that connects to Joseph's home base. This means we have to draw a French ace. The French ace will have the abilities listed on his card and all advanced maneuvers 1 to 3 at his disposal. In the stack of allied historical aces, we select the French aces. In the base game there are 3 French aces. In our game, however, we have added 3 extra aces, resulting in a total of 6 historical French aces. We thoroughly shuffle the stack of cards. We draw 1 card. We drew an extra ace, as can be seen by the pike symbol in the top left corner of the card. Michel Coiffard, however, only starts his career in July 1917. As we are currently in September 1916, this historical ace has not yet arrived on the front. We therefore have to discard this card and draw another one. We now draw the famous French ace Georges Guynemer. Georges Guynemer is still alive in September 1916, so this card is valid. He already has the expert skill which allows him to redraw a combat card. Georges Guynemer is normally flying a SPAD 7, provided no better French aircraft is available in the period of the encounter. All historical aces start with advanced maneuvers 1 to 3. They will use the best one possible when defensive. Georges Guynemer also starts with the expert skill. An enemy ace will redraw a combat card if they pull a gun jam, or if the player inflicts 5 hits or gets a DE result. The expert skill can also only be used once per sortie. The SPAD 7 is a very sturdy aircraft. The tail needs 4 hits for the aircraft to be destroyed, and the controls 3. The SPAD 7 is less agile than the Fokker D3, but has a higher speed. The only drawback of the SPAD compared to the Fokker is its firepower, which is only 3. We now roll for starting orientation. Joseph Saxon-Berg has a head-on encounter with Georges Guynemer. Joseph recognizes the airplane of the French ace, Old Charles. Joseph will have to use all his cunning and skill to survive this encounter. One of the possibilities is to avoid combat entirely. For this to succeed, a roll of 1 or 2 has to be made with a 6-sided die. If the Fokker 3D would have been faster than the SPAD, 1 can be subtracted from the roll. Unfortunately, though, this is not the case. The SPAD is faster than the Fokker. We will now roll to try to avoid combat. Against all expectations, Joseph succeeds in avoiding combat with the dreaded French ace. It's maybe a bit of an anticlimax, but at this early stage in his career, Joseph is not really up to a confrontation with a formidable historical ace such as Georges Guynemer. Relieved to have escaped the ordeal, Joseph continues his journey to his patrol area. Joseph is now over enemy lines and we roll for an enemy encounter. And enemy fighters appear on the scene. The type of enemy scouts is now determined. We again meet French Nieuport 21 scout planes. We roll for starting orientation. The French pilots surprise the Germans and attack out of the sun. An enemy scout that attacks out of the sun starts advantaged and fires first. Joseph is also not allowed to pull a defensive maneuver or use any skills. He has to take whatever is coming at him. When the enemy attacks out of the sun, also avoiding combat is no longer a possibility. We still have to roll for the enemy pilot quality. And we roll a 3, which is a trained pilot. The pilot of the Nieuport 21 pulls the trigger. And with his firepower of 3, scores 4 potential hits. Which we mark on the counter. The Nieuport 21 swoops down on the Fokker of Joseph. Guns blazing. The first hit strikes the starboard strut of the Fokker. The second hit is on canvas and no damage is done. The third hit damages the starboard strut yet again. The fourth and final hit strikes rear guns that are not present, so no additional damage is done. The damage is marked on the aircraft display mat of the Fokker. The Nieuport has used 1 ammo. We now roll for initiative. Both aircraft have the same base initiative of 12, which is determined by their speed and agility. Final initiative for the Fokker is 15, while for the Nieuport it is 16. This is a difference of only 1 and consequently, no position change takes place. For the second combat round, Joseph will make a tight turn. He will also use his reflexes skill to gain 1 position after the initiative roll. However, in this combat round, the enemy scout plane will open fire again. We therefore draw another combat card for the Nieuport 21. And the Nieuport scores 3 potential hits. The Nieuport fires. We roll for the first hit. A crew member is injured. We now roll to see if the pilot or a non-existing crew member is hit. And unfortunately, Joseph is hit. We must now roll for the severity of the wound. And now we have a problem. With a serious wound, Joseph has to break off combat, which will not be easy as he cannot use his skills. He will also score 2 less hits and have a +1 penalty for landing. A seriously wounded pilot also gets a -2 modifier during the initiative roll. This will dangerously hamper Joseph of getting into an advantaged position to disengage. Furthermore, Joseph is above enemy territory. A dive followed by an emergency landing is not an option as he will automatically be captured. We reluctantly decide to use his good luck charm to re-roll the severity of the wound. There is, however, a high risk the severity will stay the same, or worse, Joseph gets killed in action by rolling a 6. This is a key moment in the career of Joseph Saxon-Berg. Fortunately, we roll a 1, which makes the wound a light wound with no effect according to the player aid. This is somewhat misleading, as for a light wound, a -1 modifier has to be applied during initiative rolls. This will be adapted on the player aid after this mission. In the meantime, we continue to determine the damage caused by the Nieuport. The second hit strikes canvas and no damage is done. Finally, non-existing rear guns are hit. This results in no effect. The light wound of Joseph is marked on the aircraft display mat of the Fokker. The Nieuport has spent another ammo and now 4 rounds of ammo remain. Joseph now performs the tight turn. Because his Fokker has a rotary engine, he will improve 2 positions. It's time to roll for initiative. Both aircraft have the same base initiative based on the agility and speed of the aircraft. However, due to the light wound of Joseph, a -1 die roll modifier has to be applied. So we adapt the counter of the Fokker to 11. Now we roll for final initiative. As usual, the red die is for the enemy while the white die is for Joseph. We roll a 6 for Joseph and a 3 for the French pilot. This gives a total of 17 for the Fokker and 15 for the French Nieuport. The difference is 2, so there is no change of orientation. However, Joseph also uses his reflexes skill to gain 1 position after the initiative roll. And now Joseph is on the tail of the French Nieuport. At the start of the 3rd round of combat, Joseph pulls the trigger. He scores 5 potential hits. Because Joseph is on the tail of the Nieuport, he will also receive a bonus tail hit, provided there remains at least 1 random hit after the defensive maneuver of the Nieuport. Now the Nieuport will pull a defensive maneuver. The French pilot performs a barrel roll and avoids 2 hits. Joseph will potentially score 3 random hits and a bonus hit on the tail. Joseph opens fire. And spends 1 ammunition round. Joseph hits 2 times canvas and 1 time the port strut. Tailing the Nieuport, Joseph also automatically inflicts 1 hit on the tail of his opponent. We now again roll for final orientation. With a roll of a double 1, Joseph remains firmly on the tail of the Nieuport. The difference is simply too small to have a change in position. We are in the 4th round of combat when Joseph pulls the trigger of his machine gun again. And he scores 5 potential hits, plus the bonus tail hit. Now let's look at the defensive maneuver of the Nieuport. The pilot of the Nieuport 21 performs evasive maneuvers and avoids all damage. Joseph opens fire. Due to the evasive maneuvers of the French pilot, all bullets miss target. And Joseph wasted 1 round of ammunition. At the end of this 4th combat round, we have to roll for initiative. We roll a double 2. This results in a total of 13 for Joseph and 14 for the French pilot. A difference of 1 does not result in an orientation change. Joseph remains firmly on the tail of the Nieuport. We are now in the 5th round of combat, but Joseph does not give up. He pulls the trigger again, and once more scores 5 potential hits, plus a bonus tail hit. Now it's the turn of the French pilot to pull a defensive maneuver. The French pilot performs a Cuban 8, avoiding 1 hit and improving 1 position. Joseph opens fire. And again spends 1 round of ammunition. 2 rounds of ammunition remain. This time, however, he scores 4 potential hits plus the bonus tail hit. Remember that Joseph scored 5 random hits, but due to the Cuban 8, the French pilot avoided 1 hit. We now roll for the damage that Joseph possibly inflicts on the Nieuport. The first hit strikes the fuel tank of the Nieuport. We must now roll to see if this hit on the fuel tank results in a fire. The fuel tank of the Nieuport is not set on fire by this hit, but is now leaking. We continue to roll for the second hit. This time Joseph hits the port strut of the Nieuport. We now roll for the third hit. With this hit, the starboard strut of the Nieuport is damaged. We finally roll for the fourth hit. This one strikes canvas and has no effect. The damage is marked on the aircraft display mat of the Nieuport, including the bonus tail hit. Due to the hit on the fuel tank, fuel is now leaking from the Nieuport. Leaking fuel tanks force an aircraft to abort combat. Basically, from now on, the Nieuport 21 will behave like a 2-seater without the optional head-on rule. The French pilot will take every opportunity to disengage from combat. In the meantime, the Cuban 8 maneuver of the Nieuport has changed the orientation for Joseph from tailing to advantaged. We will now roll for final initiative. As usual, the white die is for Joseph and the red die is for his French opponent. The roll leads to a final initiative of 17 for Joseph and 16 for the French pilot. Again, this leads to no change in orientation. Joseph lost his favorable tailing position, but is still in an advantaged orientation relative to the Nieuport. However, there is only 2 ammo left and Joseph still has to fly all the way back to his home base. Joseph decides to open fire one more time before he will try to disengage from the fight. We draw a combat card for Joseph. Unfortunately, Joseph has a gun jam. The gun jam is marked on the aircraft display mat of the Fokker. We now draw a defensive card for the French Nieuport. The Nieuport performs a tight turn and improves 2 positions because of its rotary engine. The tight turn brings the Nieuport 21 in the advantaged orientation relative to the Fokker. We now roll for initiative. We roll a double 5. With this roll, the orientation will not change as the difference remains 1. Due to the fuel leak, the Nieuport will not fire but will try to disengage during this combat round. Joseph, on the other hand, will try to unjam his forward machine gun. We first roll for the Nieuport to disengage. On a roll of 1 to 4, the disengagement will succeed. And surprisingly, the disengagement fails, which will cause the Nieuport to lose 1 position. We now roll for Joseph to try to unjam his forward machine gun. And Joseph succeeds in unjamming his weapon. The weapon's jam marker is removed. And the Nieuport loses 1 position due to his failed disengagement. Both aircraft are now head-on. We now roll for initiative. The final initiative for Joseph is 13, while the final initiative for the French pilot is 16. The difference is 3, and the Nieuport gains 1 position. Because of this, the Nieuport is again in an advanced orientation and will try to disengage once more. Joseph, on the other hand, is in a disadvantaged position. He will perform a tight turn, trying to get again onto the tail of the Nieuport. For the Nieuport to successfully disengage, a 1 to 4 is to be rolled with a standard 6-sided die. Astonishing, the Nieuport yet again fails to disengage. Because of this failure to disengage, the Nieuport loses 1 position and both aircraft are again head-on. Now Joseph performs the standard tight turn maneuver and gets onto the tail of the Nieuport once more. We now roll for final orientation. As usual, the red die is for the French pilot and the white die is for Joseph. This time we are performing a manual roll. The final initiative of the Fokker is 14, while the final initiative of the Nieuport is 13. The difference of 1 results in no change to the orientation, and Joseph is now firmly tailing the Nieuport once more. We are now in the 9th combat round, and the Nieuport is desperately trying to escape, while Joseph frantically wants to deliver the final blow. Joseph has the Nieuport in his crosshairs and pulls the trigger. With a burst of his machine gun, Joseph potentially destroys the enemy plane. Is the Nieuport going to evade all damage, or is he doomed? The French pilot of the Nieuport makes a bad move and Joseph will improve 1 position. The orientation improvement is however irrelevant as Joseph is already tailing and opens fire, utterly destroying the Nieuport. Finally, despite being lightly wounded, Joseph managed to destroy his tough French opponent, ending the dogfight. With 1 ammo round left, Joseph heads back to base. He should have just sufficient fuel to make it home. On his way back home, Joseph is flying again over no man's land. We roll for an encounter. The flight of Jasta 5 encounters enemy scouts over no man's land. We now roll for the type of enemy scout planes. They turn out to be Nieuport 21 once more. We roll for starting orientation. The enemy Nieuports start advantaged. As the aircraft of Joseph is damaged and only 1 ammo round remains, he will try to avoid this encounter. If he rolls a 1 or a 2 with a 6-sided die, he succeeds. Luckily, Joseph succeeds in avoiding combat. Joseph continues his journey and is now moving to friendly territory. He breathes a sigh of relief that he has come this far with a damaged plane with only one ammo. But he is not safe on his home aerodrome yet. We now have to roll for another possible encounter. And no enemy planes are encountered over friendly lines. Joseph is now approaching his home base. And we roll a last time for a possible enemy encounter. A French two-seater is noticed, spying near Joseph's home base. We now roll for the type of two-seater we encounter. And it's a good old Nieuport 12 again. We roll for starting orientation. And Joseph encounters the Nieuport 12 head-on. As Joseph's Fokker is damaged and only has one ammo, he will try to avoid the confrontation. For this he needs a roll of 2 or less. And he rolls a 4. A Nieuport 12 has a slower speed than the Fokker, so we can subtract 1 from the die roll. This would give us a 3, which is unfortunately still not enough to avoid combat. The Nieuport 12 is selected on the two-seater aircraft display mat. We roll for the quality of the enemy pilot, and it's a 2. The French enemy is a trained pilot with no particular advantages or disadvantages. With a speed of 9 and an agility of 2, the base initiative of the Nieuport 12 is 11. This value we already mark on the counter. Joseph, being head-on with the Nieuport 12, will open fire with his last round of ammo. We therefore draw a combat card for Joseph to attack the two-seater. Joseph scores 4 potential hits and also hits 1 crew member of the two-seater. As the Nieuport 12 is head-on but has no forward weapons, a defensive combat card is drawn. The Nieuport 12 performs a tight turn. As the Nieuport 12 has a rotary engine, he will improve 2 positions instead of only 1. We indicate the 4 random hits from Joseph on the number of hits counter. We also flip the yellow marker to indicate that a crew member of the Nieuport will be hit too. Joseph opens fire. We now roll to see the damage caused by the first hit. The first hit strikes the fuel tank of the enemy two-seater. We now have to roll to determine if the hit on the fuel tank caused a fire. The hit on the fuel tank caused a fuel leak but caused no fire. We are now going to roll for the second hit. The second hit strikes the canvas, which has no damaging effect. The third hit damages the tail of the Nieuport 12. And the fourth hit damages the starboard strut. We now roll to determine the crew injury. and the enemy pilot is hit. We roll for the severity of the injury. And the French pilot is seriously wounded. The damage is marked on the aircraft display mat of the two-seater. The two-seater performs the tight turn and gains 2 positions. He is now tailing the Fokker. We now roll for initiative. As the pilot of the two-seater is seriously wounded, the Nieuport 12 has to apply a -2 modifier. We will now roll for final initiative. We roll a 2 for the French Nieuport and a 1 for Joseph. This results in a 12 for the Fokker and an 11 for the Nieuport. A net difference of 1 gives no change in position. We should also not forget to expend the remaining ammo of the Fokker. As the Nieuport 12 is tailing the Fokker, the two-seater will automatically disengage. With a seriously wounded pilot and a damaged aircraft, it is possible that the two-seater will not make it back to home base. We roll a 3. If we add 1 for the leaking fuel tanks and 1 for the seriously wounded pilot, we still don't have 10 or more. Joseph, therefore, did not score another aerial victory. At last, Joseph reaches his home base for landing. We roll for the weather. And the weather is good. The Fokker of Joseph has no serious damage that hinders the landing, so we have an automatic safe landing. The damage to the Fokker is quickly repaired. The offensive patrol was very successful. Joseph receives 1 fatigue point from this sortie. During an intense fight over enemy territory, Joseph managed to down another French Nieuport 21. We are at the end of September and all combat patrols have been completed. For each new month, we have to roll the number of contact patrols. We roll for the number of contact patrols in October 1916, and we only have 1. Due to the light wound Joseph has sustained in his last mission, he will miss this 1 sortie in October. The reason for missing this 1 contact patrol is noted in the logbook. This will also reset his fatigue to 0. We now have to roll for the number of contact patrols in November. And in the month of November, Jasta 5 will have 3 contact patrols. We mark them in the logbook. Each new month, we also have to reshuffle the deck of combat cards. For his light injury sustained in his fierce fight with an enemy Nieuport, Joseph receives his first black wound badge. With it, he will also receive another prestige point. Because of this award, his prestige level is also raised to level 4. Note that the wound badge only gives a single prestige point. For further injuries, more wound badges will be awarded, but the pilot will not earn more prestige points for further awards due to injuries. For the moment, no prestige points can be spent on transitioning to new aircraft. Joseph has to wait until December for the new Albatros D3 to become available. With this long mission, we end this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and see you on the next mission of Lieutenant Joseph Saxenberg.